Um, so with a little bit of background on this, because I thought maybe I would discuss it at last week's show had I had the time. Obviously, as I said then, we didn't, but that's okay. And going into it a little bit, if you couldn't already tell from this program listening to it before, I am a very big fan of the Beatles. I would go as far to rank them as the greatest band of all time, and I think I'd say even beyond that. When I say that, just to make clear how I'm pretty serious about this. I don't mean like they're the greatest band in recent music history. I mean, put them against anyone who's made music before in history, like Mozart, Beethoven, whatever. They're probably, I think their music is just legitimately better than those, and that's fair enough. Everyone has their own tastes, and I think a lot of people when they say they're the greatest band, since it's not an uncommon take to hear from people, kind of imagine wouldn't say necessarily very dissimilar things, but I just thought I should put that out there that that's the place I'm coming from when talking about this song. And at the same time, I think it's important to emphasize, though, I think a lot of people like me, as soon as it was announced last week, and while it wasn't even officially announced last week, it's been, well, I don't think announced in interviews dating back to, I think, March, unless I have that incorrect. Paul McCartney had said he had been planning to make a new Beatles song with utilizing AI technology to help with it, which at the time I think a lot of people were kind of unsure on what that meant. At this point, we do know what. I think, though, considering that was during the time where these videos have seemed to have dropped off a little bit in popularity, where we saw all those AI songs of people singing songs they didn't really sing. A lot of those with the Beatles, I had noticed. So I thought it was interesting to see that, or to imagine the possibility that he was planning to use AI technology to recreate John Lennon's voice, which luckily was not the case with this song. But I think it's important to keep in mind the perspective that whatever people might have imagined from this song, when you hear the idea that the greatest band in history is making a new song, your expectations will be at a level that people can't even that's hard to even quantify. I think it's important to keep in mind that clearly whatever this song would have been would not have lived up to the hype of a new Beatles song just on paper. So I think it's important to judge it just as what it is, which I think a lot of people have been doing. But at the same time, I have seen a lot of people who are disappointed by the song, and we'll get into that later on. But partially because they thought it didn't live up to that idea of what a new Beatles song would be. So I just think it's important to keep in mind everyone can judge music however they want, but I think it's a bit ridiculous to kind of expect that it would be the greatest song ever written or stand up to some of their greatest songs they'd ever written. So anyway, but overall, and this will probably be similar to the Hackney Diamonds segment from last week, just talking about it. I don't really want to do a full-fledged review going into a lot of complex points about it, but just my general thoughts of the songs. I'm not a full album. What I think of it. So overall, I would is it as good as some people might expect just based on the premise of it being the last Beatles song, quote unquote? I think it's pretty obvious that it wouldn't be. Nothing could live up to that idea. But at the same time, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good song. I've listened to it a few times now. If I'll be honest, I didn't think as much of it when I first heard it, but when I really listened to it a lot, I enjoyed it a lot more. I've listened to it a few times today already. And yeah, I think I have pretty much solidified my thoughts on it. Partially, I listened to it a lot because I wanted to solidify my thoughts on it so I could give just my general opinion on it and not just give the best rundown of the points that I have that I possibly could. So to start off, I think one thing that a lot of people have pointed out about it, and just to different effects, is that it is a slower song. It's not like to cite a few examples from the Beatles, like Revolution or Penny Lane or anything like that, a lot of a more fast-paced, maybe even upbeat song. Is not an upbeat song at any stretch of the imagination, which I found is a pattern with the last two songs the Beatles released after the breakup, which is kind of a weird sentence. They released after the breakup, but you know what I mean. Free as a Bird and Real Love, those are the two songs they released before. That none of them were very fast songs, and on one hand, I am disappointed with the premise of that in general. That I think a lot of the faster songs were a lot more fun and had we could in some ways attract a more wider audience. I mean, I don't think that's what people going into the songs are necessarily looking for, to just see who else it could attract. But I think it was I thought it was a good song, honestly, despite that it was slower. And I think a lot of people might have expected that it would be slower, And that kind of, when I talk about expectations, I think that's kind of what you have to put in perspective for a lot of this. That some people maybe expected a different kind of song. For me personally, I kind of imagined it would be a slower song. I had not heard the John Lennon version that he recorded, in his basement or whatever it was, in the late 70s that was already circulating on the internet. I know some people I talked to had said they had listened to it. I never heard it before, and I made the choice not to before listening to this just because I thought it'd be more interesting to not hear the song beforehand and then go back and listen to it afterwards. So it is a slower song, which I think that part of it is just I expected that, knowing that it was going to be their last song, as they call it. But again, if some people wanted a faster song, maybe they'd be a bit disappointed by it. But I guess it comes down to what you wanted and anticipated. So beyond that, though, I think that the fact that the AI was used in the song, I expected, again, that to be something that maybe would take some people out of it, depending on how it sounded. I thought it actually sounded pretty good. I thought I watched the documentary video that had been put out yesterday before this, and it explained that it was mostly just to remove the piano part from the song. As if you listen to the original, John is playing it on a piano, and some of the piano at times can kind of drown out his voice, or you can hear the piano in places where in this version you might not want to hear it. And I think that makes sense as to why they might want to remove that. And, of course, no shame to John Lennon for it being that way. It was just supposed to be a recording he made, probably just to listen to the song later on if he had wanted to use it for a full track some point in the future. So no shame to him for doing that. But yeah, I'm glad that the AI wasn't used to recreate anyone's voice or anything like that. I think maybe that's a separate discussion, although I'm probably months late to it now, considering that I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten about the whole AI memes of taking people's voices, making them say things they didn't say, but whatever. I think that the song, I'm glad that it didn't use AI to go over the top or anything like that, that might take people out of the experience more a little bit. I don't remember if I said, in fact, I'm sure I actually didn't say this now on the radio, because I forgot that I remember I didn't speak on this at all on the radio last week. I thought for a moment maybe I did briefly, but no, I did. I was worried, or maybe not worried, but kind of interested a little bit going into how Paul's voice would sound on this song. And no one disrespect him, it's not a criticism of his voice, but just that you can tell he is older now, and that I didn't know if it would be weird to hear him singing with like a younger John Lennon. To be honest, the vast majority of the time, John is the lone lead singer in it, so you really wouldn't hear Paul's voice that much if you're really looking out for it. You can hear it in certain parts that you can hear that he's singing, but it's not distracting at all or anything like that. At least in my opinion, maybe some people would be distracted by it, and I don't know. I'm not going to. I mean, if you're listening to me right now, so I'm not going to be going around judging people's voices, but I thought it wasn't a distracting thing to me personally. But I will say the other thing I wanted to say about the song in terms of the lead singer of it. From what I understand, the main reason this song was put off so long and they didn't do a version of it in the mid-90s when the Beatles were releasing some new material again is that they wanted to use John's voice as the lead singer for the song, because that was a big part of that idea when making those songs, was that they wanted John to be involved. They didn't want it to be just Paul, George, and Ringo releasing some new material under the guise of the Beatles, which I think is a noble thing that they would want to do that. They would want to wait till they had the technology to make this song sound good enough that it was still John doing the lead vocals. But if I'm just going to be out, I think they could have released it in the mid-90s and just say written by John Lennon and that was his contribution. Or maybe play a little bit of his voice at the beginning when the piano, I think, is less. It would be easier to tune that out. But I do respect that they wanted to wait till they had the technology to do it with John Lennon the way they had wanted to. So, yeah, those are sort of my basic thoughts on it. I will say it's a bittersweet song, which is something a lot of people have said. And the main reason I say it, I think a lot of people would say it for different reasons, is just in the span of that minute-long time frame, because this is the first time the Beatles have released a new song and just said, this is it, this is the end of the end of the Beatles as we know. There will not be another Beatles song to this after this one. I thought about it, and it's sad that in that span of 4 minutes of that song, we go through the entire gambit of the Beatles, being back together in a sense, and then at the end of it, it's just not only are they not together again, but it's just they will never be back together again. Period. They're just closing the door on that chapter of their lives, and I think that makes it a sadder song. It is overall kind of a sad song in general, and we'll be playing it after this segment, so you'll get to judge for yourself. But I thought that kind of just added a little bit more to it, and I think the biggest thing, and this goes for a lot of the Beatles music in general, a lot of the emotion in it is just what you'll take from it listening to it, or what you'll, from your personal experience, what you'll bring to it. And I think maybe a lot of people wouldn't feel that way listening to the song, but I know there are a lot of music critics out there, and a lot of them probably wouldn't like the song, in part because they don't want to bring their emotion to it. But I don't know, I guess I'm easily swayed by that the fact that there's a new Beatles song at all, that I would have taken anything maybe. I don't know. I feel like if it was genuinely a bad song, which is, I think most people can agree, probably an impossibility considering who's giving it to us. But I would have disliked it. But honestly, I did enjoy it. I think it was a good song. And I think just the last thing I was going to get to about the song before playing it is that I wouldn't say my opinion wouldn't be swayed by what someone else says or what someone else thinks. But I will say, I have seen some people who haven't been big fans of the song. I think it's gotten a mostly positive reception from people, but at the same time, that positive reception is something like a 7 out of 10 overall if you judge all the people who liked it, all the people who didn't like it. There are clearly many people who didn't like it. And I just think a pattern, I don't want to criticize what other people think, but I don't want to say the exact person or name people. It's not as if they are going to listen to this program and take offense to it, but is when I read one review and that said something along the lines of, because this song is going to be included on the new special edition of the 1967 to 1970 compilation album at the very end, which before getting into what they said in the review, I will say I'm not really the biggest fan of that decision. I understand why they want to do it, because if I'm not mistaken, the 1963 to 1966 album opens with Love Me Do, and that's going to be the B-side for the vinyl version of this song. So I understand what the logic is of doing that. But I'm just sort of against it because I'm not sure if these albums are reissued at any point since 1995. I think it was 96 when the last Beatles song was released, and now. But if they were, they never included any of the new Beatles songs from the 90s on them. And I think it's because they're trying to do a bookend thing of the first song on the first album, the last song on this album. But I think that's really unnecessary just because it says 1970 there in this song. John Lennon didn't even write it in 1970. It was, I don't know the exact year, but it was the late 70s or maybe the mid 70s when he was in his sort of semi-retirement era. So it wasn't even written when he was with the Beatles. So I'm just sort of against putting it on. And I hope that I would be more for it though if I know when they release this album again, like when they do reprints of it, they don't, or repressings I think is the technical term, that if I knew that they weren't going to include it then, but I couldn't say for sure. But anyway, my point of bringing that up is that some people take issue with that because people saying it's not on the level of something like Strawberry Fields or Let It Be or anything like that. And as I already said, yeah, I wouldn't say it. On one hand, I can't really say for sure because the song is just, it's too recent. The emotions are still high from the excitement of a new Beatles song coming out at all, and this one being billed as the last one. But I will say, on the other hand, there's about a 90%. What song could be as good as those songs? I don't think there's any music. I don't think we've reached the heights that those songs gave us in music history. We just haven't at this point. Probably never will, and there's really no way we could ever hope to recapture it. But anyway, I think that to say that just because it's not as good is just I don't want to tell people again how to criticize something, how to have opinions on something, but that just seems to me like a bit of a cop out to say that. I just think that. I don't think any reasonable person would have expected it to be as good as those songs. And apparently there are people who would disagree with me on that, I guess, and which is fair enough. I just think, and I know that there's the argument that these people weren't expecting it to be that good. It's more just, it's not that good, and so that means that there should be points taken off of it. I don't know. But I would disagree with that. I think that if you look at the Beatles as, they have nothing left to prove to anyone. There's only 2 of them left now, sadly. And they just wanted to release this song to just, I guess I would say maybe set the record straight as this is the final, this is just, a official ending to the Beatles. With the other 2 ending, what you could call endings with Let It Be and then the last song in the mid-90s, where it was never saying that there would never be another Beatles song. It was leaving the door open. And this is just maybe to put things in a happier note with the two living Beatles, being friends with each other, working together on this, and the estates of the former Beatles, the Beatles who have sadly left this world, approving of it, ending it on a happier note than how things ended in the 70s with Let It Be and the fallout that came from that. So I think if you just look at it, and you can look at it however you want, but if you just look at it like that, as just making a happier note as the final chapter of the Beatles saga, ironically being a kind of a sadder note than their last final songs, but whatever, then I think honestly, I think the best way to look at it and the best way to get a lot of enjoyment out of it.